All right, well, we're recording. Welcome, everybody. This is an interview with Elizabeth Adams, who is the author of many wonderful JAFF Regencies, but also one of my favorite books, which is Green Card, and another one, which is Ship to Shore. I think that was just like a year or two ago, Ship to Shore.
Yeah, it was a year and a couple months. Yeah.
Okay. And I wanted to talk maybe more about the moderns today. And since I love Green Card, and I was just rereading it, in fact, because
It's fun.
yes. So I know that started out actually when you were writing it as JAFF, and then you decided it really wasn't going to be super related to Pride and Prejudice anymore. So you changed it. What
Yeah.
made you decide that?
Several things. I remember having so many conversations with people. I actually went, gosh, what year was it? I think it was 2012. Green Card was like several years project because I was a full-time student and then had a baby while I was doing Green Card. And if you've ever, everyone who's listening, if you've ever had a baby, you know how that will just like completely derail everything else that you're doing. So anyhow, I went to Seattle for a few days with my husband. We went on a vacation, and we just got lucky, and it coincided with this big JAFF event that was happening there, kind of before those events became popular. And so I met like a dozen JAFF readers and writers at this random pub outside of Seattle. And I asked a couple of them, I was like, so I've got this thing that I'm working on and I'm a few chapters in, but it just doesn't feel like Austen anymore. Like I definitely took her characters, what I believed to be their personalities and their characteristics, and I planted them in another world. But nothing else is Austen. I mean, we're not even on the same continent. So I took them, from Regency England, and I put them in modern day New York City. And he's still English, but she's American. And her parents are divorced, unlike the Bennets, although I do think in modern times the Bennets would still
Right.
be divorced.
I think so
So
too.
I feel that was fair. And so I did originally have it as a P&P, but I think I was just 4 or 5 chapters in when I was like, I don't think this is full on JAFF anymore. And we got to remember that I wrote this book, like I started it, like I think at the beginning of 12 and didn't finish it till like the end of 14. And during that time, people were much more persnickety about their JAFF. Like now it's kind of like anything goes. And they're like, oh, fairies and dragons, and oh, she's a spy, and you can be anything you want. And now it's a much more open playing field, and the genre has kind of exploded in terms of readership as well as types of stories and time periods. But at the time, that was not the case. So people were like so like about everything. And they were like, that's not Jeff and that's not Jane. And the purists had a really big voice. And I heard it. And I was like, yeah, they're right. This is not Jane. Like it's inspired by, but it's definitely not a strict interpretation. It's definitely not a modernization of the original story. So for people who have read Green Card, I kind of peppered some characters in, like, so the main people are William Harper, which, by the way, the reason his first name did not get changed is because that story at the time was 175,000 words, which for those of you who don't know is a crap ton. And have you ever tried to search and replace a word that's a name that's also a word? So you cannot change like Mark or Will, or I don't know what other names would fall into that category, but anyway, I tried searching and replacing his name and it was not happening. And then I was going to have to go through like 425 pages
Right.
of like, so that's totally the lazy reason that his name is still Will. Plus, I loved it. I loved him as Will. I did temporarily change her.
Will.
No, I've always liked it. I've always loved that name. So that's also a big part of it. I really liked it. But there were a handful of other names that I would have been okay with, but it was just too incredibly difficult and I couldn't do it. But I did change temporarily Elizabeth to Catherine, and because I needed a name that had versions. And I did some rookie mistakes, like I had some things I wanted to keep that now I would never do. Like now, as a seasoned writer, I would just be like, that's not important enough to change the whole story around this one thing. So let it go. But at the time, it was my second book. So anyway, so she's back to being Elizabeth. She's Elizabeth Barrett, and he's William Harper. And her older sister is Jenny, which is a very common name now, as Jane would have been back then. And then I made her sisters Heather and Tiffany, and there are 4 girls instead of 5 girls. And so it's a little bit different, but I think her dad is kind of Mr. Bennet-esque, and her mom is totally Mrs. Bennet-esque.
And
So yeah,
Caroline
that's
is
why,
married and nice.
yes, and I kind of did that like just to have a little bit of fun. Caroline, there's a woman named Caroline in this story who is not based on anybody in Pride and Prejudice. She's a completely original character, but she's super nice. And here's what's funny, that I've always hated that Caroline Bingley has that name, because I actually love the name Caroline.
Oh.
Several women named Caroline, and they are lovely people. They're sweet and kind and great hostesses. They throw a mean party. And they're like really nice people. So I hate that this cow has such a lovely name. So yeah, so I don't know what was the question. I get so sidetracked, but yeah.
No, I think that is the question. The question was,
Yeah.
why did you change it to to be not JAFF, And I think
Yeah,
that
because
makes
it's just
perfect
not
sense.
Jane
But
enough.
we can still think of it as JAFF because
Mhm.
they're still Elizabeth and Will.
Yeah, one of my reviews were like, "We know who they really are, wink, wink." I was like, "You can imagine that that's them as much as you want. Be my guest."
But for you purists, understand.
Uh-huh. Jackpot. Yes, for the
It's
purists, I just did not want everybody attacking me, which was happening at the time. People
right,
were like, they would be vicious with
right.
your reviews if you weren't like on top of things. Like if Georgiana was 6 months older than she's supposed to be, it was like, "Meh." So
Well,
yeah, I was covering my bases and being
so
careful.
let me ask you, when I first started reading Jeff, I only wanted to read Regency. And then I feel like I had read everything. So I was like,
Mhm.
okay, well, I'm going to try some
Mhm.
other time periods, and I loved them. So is that how you
Mhm.
came to writing
Yes.
modern, or?
I only read Regencies in the beginning because I was like, being like a total snob. And I think that's the path a lot of people take. They start with the Regencies, they read all of them, and then you get bored, because how can you not get bored? So then you want something else. So I think one of my gateway alternate time books was Karen Cox's 1932, which is one of
Wonderful
my
book.
all-time favorites.
Wonderful
And
book.
it helps that Karen is a sweetheart, because I hate it when I love a book and then like, and not just Jaff, I'm talking about like in general. And then you'll see like an interview with the author and you're like, oh, he's kind of a twat. And then you're like really upset. Like, you're like, oh, I helped him pay his electric bill when I bought his $15 book. And then you're like mad at yourself. So I love Karen and I will buy everything that she writes because I'm happy to contribute to her electric bill. She's a super awesome person and deserves it. And but anyways, I love that story so much. And that obviously takes place in 1932, hence the title. And then I also read kind of around that same time the first rendition of Bo North's book,
Oh,
Longbourn
right.
Songbird.
That's a
I read
wonderful
the
book.
original posted on FFN like forever ago, which is like, I think like 3 versions ago. And I loved it so much. Her description of Colonel Fitzwilliam as a rangy lion just stayed with me forever. And then when she redid the book and I read it, I so messaged her and I was like, you lost the lion line. I love that line. Like, ah, I was like messaging so fast. Like, why did you take it out? But so those were kind of like gateway books. And so I started like in the 30s and then I was like in the 40s and then just working my way up to like totally modern books. So, and then once you're in, it's just, you can't stop, because a lot of the moderns I really like. One thing I don't like in moderns is when the exact same Wickham storyline happens the exact same way.
Right, because it can't.
And I'm like, yeah, who, like, two things that drive me completely nuts. And I feel like I'm just like moaning on this interview about things that are annoying, and I should probably not do that. 2 things that drive me crazy about moderns and why I did not put them in my moderns, because I just find them so hard to believe in a modern day, that someone would be promised a job and not given that job, even though it was written into the will. And just like she says in the original P&P, when Wickham tells her that he was supposed to have a living, and she's all, could you not seek
Right.
legal redress? And I'm like, yeah, if it was really yours, you should have been able to take them to court and deal with it.
Right.
So when they have something similar in the modern storylines, I'm like, I find that really hard to believe. And it's the modern world. I mean, especially when they're in America, it's not like this crazy system that you're incapable of climbing. You know, if you had, like, I've seen so many books that do this, like seriously, dozens upon dozens upon dozens that do this, where Wickham has like an Ivy League fancy pants education, and he's whining because he's working in like a mailroom. And I'm just like, okay, this is where I have zero sympathy for you. And I can't believe that anybody does, because if you have an amazing education and all these connections in the modern world, there's zero reason that you can't do something with it. So the fact that Elizabeth believes that is just so incredibly shocking to me that I can't get on board, and it ruins the story. And the other thing I hate in moderns is when she doesn't respond to his letter, because the reason she didn't respond back then is because that's improper. And I was like, there's no manner of improper now. So if he emails you, you just hit the little button that says reply and start typing. So easy. Thanks, got your letter, feel like a jerk. Sorry. Hashtag love you, mean it. Like, so easy. So those things kind of drive me nuts. So I feel this is not a question that you asked, but I'm going to answer for myself that I'm
That's
picky
fine.
in many ways. I'm pickier about moderns than I am about Regencies, because I feel that the story doesn't 100% translate perfectly. So I want them to
Right.
change it a little bit,
Right.
which is part of the reason when I know I'm being interviewed, but why I loved your Headstrong series, because you didn't try to make it exactly like canon. Like, the characters were very believably still themselves, but they behaved like modern people would behave. And I was like, thank
I was just thinking,
Finally.
when he insults her in Headstrong, we sort of almost start with the insult. She leaves, and he thinks about it for the afternoon, and then he drives out to see her to apologize,
Mhm.
because, you know, you would, and
Yes.
he can. So
Unless you're a complete jerk, like, you would have to be such an asshat to not apologize for that in modern day. Like, back then, obviously, a man can't come see a woman without implications,
right.
and, you know, all the things, the difference in their stations and blah,
That's
blah,
right.
blah. But in a modern day, you wouldn't do that, especially if she was specifically recommended by your own cousin, as
Right.
happened in your story. Like, this is
That's
your
right.
cousin's friend, and they were like in a life or death situation. They have like a trauma bond. Like, you can't.
Well, which he doesn't realize at the time, but he does
still.
know that it's his cousin that he's supposed to be angry at, not her. So he goes
Mhm.
and apologizes.
Maturity, people, maturity. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, and the other thing about moderns is often we have to age them up a bit, because they wouldn't
Yes.
be making the same decisions at 27 and 20 that they would, today, that they would be
Yeah.
then.
Well, and a girl getting married at 20 to a 27-year-old guy is just
It's a little
tiniest
young.
bit like creeper. A little bit creepy. Yeah. It's a
Well,
little like,
I
can't
mean,
you
it
just like
depends,
date for a
but
while?
it depends on the 20-year-old, I think. But Elizabeth is
I would
not an
agree.
especially mature mature. She's still very judgmental, and she's still very young. So I think in many moderns, that's why they age her up a bit and maybe close down the difference in ages a little bit. I made it 5
Mhm.
years, and I aged Elizabeth up.
You know, I actually aged them both up in Green Card, but I made the gap bigger because I needed him to be older to have the position that he had, but I
Right.
needed her to be younger to meet him. So it was this like, but she was older than I was when I got married. So,
She's 23, right, in Green Card?
yeah, when Green Card
She's 23
starts,
and he's 32.
yeah. And it's fake. So that's part of why it's like not such a big deal.
Right.
And by the time it's real, she's 25. And she was very mature for her
Right.
age. I did that on purpose. I made her a mature person for it because I was too. She has this lovely little thing we call parentification, which is what happens when you have kind of like crap parents
Right.
and you kind of raise yourself.
Right.
So
Right.
you tend to be more mature in some ways and less mature in other ways. So there was a lot of that happening. Yeah, but he was definitely concerned about her age in the book. I don't think that came across very clearly, but he was like, in my mind, he was like, wait, this woman is like really young and I'm going to marry her and you expect people to believe this? Like, so, but there were so many cuts with Green Card. Like I have files upon files upon files of cut scenes. So it might be in one of those that just didn't make it into the book where he's complaining that she's so
Well,
young.
you really should maybe pull some of those out and offer them to us. For those of us who've read it so many times.
What's funny about Green Card is it's never been like a huge book in terms, like compared to my Regencies. Regencies sell like a gajillion times more than moderns. But the people who have read Green Card are like really attached to it. Like it has a small but very loyal following. I'm attached to it. Like seriously, I am attached to it. And I've called that book my baby so many times that I just, yeah, like when I thought about maybe sacrificing a book to a traditional publisher to like expand my readership, I considered doing that for a little while. And I just couldn't do it with Green Card. I could do it with Ship to Shore. Ship to Shore I like, but it's not my baby. So Green Card has a special place in my heart.
Well, let's talk a little bit about Ship to Shore. I was so sure when he revealed his name, it was going to be Wentworth. And it wasn't at all.
No, it wasn't at all. I won't tell for those who haven't read it. Basically, that book also started as an Elizabeth and Darcy situation years ago. I think I actually was writing it before Green Card was even finished. I'm positive I was actually, because I remember the house that I lived in. And I wrote and I moved out of that house in January of 13. And Green Card didn't finish till the end of 14. So what happened was I got an idea for Ship to Shore, and I thought it was going to be relatively short, like 25,000 words. And I started writing it, and I got through the first, I don't know, 25% of the book really fast, just like got through it kind of on weekends. I remember that my baby was maybe not even a year old. I think I had like a 7-month-old when I started writing that. And so, and she's now in 3rd grade. So that's how long ago that started. But then I stopped and I decided to focus on Green Card and finish my degree and take care of my 3 children, all of that. And so, yeah, I put Ship to Shore aside for a long, like years. I wrote like 4 more books and just kept it aside. And then I started thinking about it and I was like, I think I want to finish that. I think I have an idea for that. And I went back and I added a bunch of stuff and I fluffed it up and added all these other things in it. And really, so originally the Captain Hawkins character was a Darcy type character and the Maggie character was an Elizabeth type character. And then I got a little bit more into it and I was like, she's a kind of like a little bit playful like Elizabeth, but she's really not an Elizabeth. Like her nature is not Elizabeth. And then so many people have asked me, have assumed that is a modern persuasion.
Yes.
And okay, here's
that's what I saw too.
That was a complete accident. Now I look at it, I'm like, oh yeah, I 100% see why you thought that. Because so Maggie, my main character in this story, comes from a wealthy family. She is now she's in a big family, but she has this older brother, Harrison, the oldest in the family, who's obsessed with himself, thinks he's better than everybody else, and looks down on her in all the ways, in like every possible way. So that's kind of an Elizabeth Elliot kind of a character. Then she has but she does have this sister, Sarah, who lives with her, whose name changed like 7 times while writing it. So excuse me if I call her Grace or something else, which I almost called her. So, but she has a sister that's much more of a Jane Bennet kind of a character. So there's that. So it's kind of a mesh almost. And then I don't think that the Hawkins character is very Wentworth-esque. I honestly think he's almost more Colonel Fitzwilliam in his flavor.
Yeah.
Because he's not haughty enough to be Darcy, but he is below her technically in social standing. She's a trust fund baby, and she's the total black sheep of her family, much like Anne Elliot was. Her siblings, what I love about Maggie, because they kind of became their own people, but if you're looking for persuasion or you're looking for Pride and Prejudice, you will find it. It's in there, but it's nowhere near 100%. It's definitely inspired by. And I think persuasion just 100% leaked in without me like even realizing. It went rogue. So the story went rogue. But what was I saying? So, oh yeah, so at the end of the book, so Hawkins has a father who ends up needing physical therapy. So in the last few chapters, Maggie's visiting and she's helping him with his physical therapy, and she's like getting all involved with the family. And the dad is asking about her family, and he's like, okay, so your siblings are a surgeon, a psychiatrist, and a lawyer. And she's like, yeah. He's like, and you're a third grade teacher. She's like, yeah. And he's like, you must love Thanksgiving. And I was like, yes. Like, so she is very like, her family all looks down on her because they all have PhDs and they all have these like fancy degrees and these fancy jobs, and they drive Mercedes, and they're like, you know, people. And she's like this little third grade teacher who's like cutting out things of construction paper all the time. And so she's very much the black sheep of her family, which is very Anne Elliot, but she really took on a life of her own. And you know what's funny is by the end of the book, I was completely in love with her as a character. She was so fun to write and just honestly took on a life of her own. So I would say that if Anne Elliot and Elizabeth Bennet like could be blended, that would be Maggie. Like, and that was a complete accident. I did not mean to do that.
Talk about Austen influenced.
Yeah, right? I mean, she just like seeped into my subconscious.
That's funny. Well, okay, so if somebody is not really yet interested in reading other era Austen, what would you maybe try and say to persuade them?
Oh gosh, I would say that's just silliness. That we all have to start somewhere. So just
That's persuasive.
yeah, just take the plunge. Like I don't even know. I tend to not like to persuade people, and there's a funny reason for that. Is I actually used to be really good at it when I was a kid because so just so you understand, I have 5 brothers and the 6 of us were all born within 10 years. So people called us the squad, the team, the bunch. Like we had all these names, and people would always say, "Which one are you?" And I knew they weren't asking me my name because I was the only girl. They want to know your rank. So I'm 1, he's 5, he's 2. Like, so I'm 3. So anytime people say, still to this day, I'm like in my late 30s, and they'll be like, which one are you? I'm 3. So when my mom remarried a guy who had 2 kids who totally disrupted our order, my brother who was 4 was like, I'm not being 5 now. It's like, I'm 4. I've always been 4. I'm not going to be 5. That's not cool. And my brother who was 5 was like, you are only getting bumped to 4. I'm getting bumped to like 7. how can you be okay with this? And the other 2, like they were, just 2 kids and a boy and a girl, and they had no idea what we were talking about. So we totally scared the crap out of them, those poor children. But anyway, so I don't like to be persuasive because when I was a kid, I was very persuasive. I was very good at it. And then I got accused of being manipulative. And I don't think that's fair because I think that in order to actually be manipulative, you need to know you're doing it. So I was like, how can a 12-year-old who just wants to go to the movies be manipulative? Like, I just did what I had to do to get where I needed to go. So I wasn't being malicious. I just wanted to see a movie. Can we all calm down? So anyways, so all that to say that I don't persuade people, but I think moderns are just fun. And I love these characters. I love Austen's characters. And I do think that they translate really well into modern times, more so than characters from other stories. I don't know if you guys saw the interview between Bo North and, oh gosh, who was it? I can't remember her name right now. I can see her face perfectly, but like 2 interviews ago, they were talking about how Austen's characters translate to moderns more so than like, can you imagine like a Romeo and Juliet type character in modern day? We'd be like, okay, Queen, calm down. And he would be such a player. Like, you were in love with this Rosamund girl like 2 days ago, and now you're in love with Juliet. Like, whatever, we don't believe you. So that doesn't translate nearly so well. But Austen's characters do, because we have the same situations. We have embarrassing family members, and we have parents like Mr. Bennet who don't do what they ought to do, or people like Mr. Elliot who play favorites
Right.
and don't refuse to deal with life's problems when they come and kind of live in their own world and pretend that everything's going to be okay because he wills it to be okay. Like, we all know someone who does that. So I think that Austen's characters do translate really well into the modern world. And if you haven't tried it yet, I guess I would just say, what are you waiting for? Like, if you don't like it, then no harm, no foul. You know, like, it's not like anything terrible is going to happen if you try it and you don't like it. But I think you might like it because it's really fascinating to see how you could take these same characteristics and put them in the modern day. And what does that look like? And I personally find that incredibly fascinating. But like you, it took me a while to get there. So,
Right. Well,
that's
I
very
think that's one of that's the brilliance of Jane Austen, right? Is that one of the reasons that we still read these books is that the characters still resonate. I was
Yeah.
always very surprised when I read the books as a kid how we haven't changed at all, really. I mean, despite all of the difference in class and culture and even country,
Yeah.
people are just as they are in her novel.
People are still people. And that's
Right.
that's really what she was writing about. So she was just writing about people and all the stupid stuff they do.
That's
So
right.
we
That's
still
right.
do it.
All right. Well, I think we're good. We're, I think, to the end of our time. Is there anything else you would like
Probably.
to tell
I'm
your
such a
readers?
talker. I'm sorry if I ramble
No,
on.
that's
I'm
quite all
a
right.
rambler. And of course, I've been quarantined. So every time I get in an interview, I'm like, because I'm like so excited. People, grown-ups. I've been quarantined with my 3 kids for a year. So I'm like,
You're like,
help.
please, please.
Can I have an adult conversation, please? So,
Well, I thank you so
crazy.
much. Do you have anything that you would like to say at the end here before we close out?
I don't. I would have a word of encouragement for anybody who's thinking of trying a modern and hasn't yet. Give it a go. But anybody who really is thinking of writing a modern and they haven't done it yet, give it a try. I mean, what's the worst that could happen? And a great way to start is with a short story. Just try it out. And my personal advice, which I happen to think is very good, but you can pick and choose, and maybe Melanie will agree with me, is to modernize. It's often best to take the character, like their characteristics, and bring them forward. Don't focus so much on the situation, but focus more on the people. That's what I would say is my best advice. Not that anybody asked, but I know there are some people who want to write moderns, and I get that a lot in my inbox. I get a lot of people saying, like, what should I do? Blah, blah, blah. So that's what I would suggest. It's to focus on the people, not on all the extra side stuff.
Well, great. Thank you. This has been Elizabeth Adams, and we thank you for listening.
Thanks. Thanks for having me.